I hope you had a good rest. We will now have the last session for Global HR Forum 2021 track on education. In this session, we will be looking into the world of big data and governance in education. Information in the past was used for archiving or solving problems, but information in the big data era is used to predict the future. Big data used in establishing educational governance is what we have to work on. If we have an integrated data platform established, we can determine the type of education needed for individual students and provide customized education. In this session, we have gathered together people from schools, government, local community, and experts to discuss the future direction of a big data utilization in education governance. We have as speakers Elisa Mohamedou, Head of the Center for Skills at OECD, Mr. Hiromichi Katayama, Program Specialist at UNESCO, and Kim Yong-hak, CEO of Tapa Cross. And the moderator is Kim Wooseung, President of Hanyang University. Please welcome them with a warm hand. Thank you very much. As you've just heard, there will be 3 presentations in this session. Each speaker will be given 20 minutes. And so we'd like to begin with first the presentation by the head of the Center for Skills at OECD, Elisa Mohamedou. So please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very honored to be here with you today and to be in this closing session of the forum, which I found extremely stimulating in the past 2 days. I had the Center for Skills at the OECD, and I'm also very pleased to be here in Seoul, the city that I think is one of the most interesting in the world. And last time I was here is close to 20 years ago. So that doesn't make me very young, but I'm very pleased to be back. For those who are not familiar with our work at the OECD Center for Skills, we support countries to achieve better economic and social outcomes by taking a whole of government approach and engaging with stakeholders to develop and implement better skills policies. Now, turning to our topic today, clearly the collection and analysis of big data is booming. And at the OECD, we also use big data as a complement to traditional data sources. And one area where big data is increasingly being explored is in the area of labor market and education and training policies. Let me, in the next few minutes, provide a glimpse on how and why big data has a potential for labor market and education and training policies. Looking at countries all over the world, many transformative processes are affecting traditional labor markets. While some transformations have been in progress for some time, others are disruptive or are accelerating previous structural developments. Megatrends such as climate change and digitalization are transformative processes, while the COVID-19 pandemic led to a disruption of labor market, but also to an acceleration of digitalization. In response to these trends, labor markets and skills have been significantly affected. For example, a green transition will lead to a rotation of jobs, meaning there will be job destructions and also job creations. Digitalization has led to a decrease in manual jobs and increasingly requires advanced digital skills. An aging population will increase demand for certain products and services, such as healthcare and personal services. This will in turn affect the type of skills that will be needed in the labor market. COVID-19 led to a sudden decrease in certain occupations while increasing the demand for others, such as healthcare workers. What these examples show is that labor markets are rapidly evolving and changing the skill demanded in the labor market. As a consequence, policymakers require faster and more detailed information on skills to monitor and respond to the challenges created by structural, economic, and social megatrends, as well as pandemics, such as the one we are unfortunately still in. Providing information in quasi-real time, online labor market data have great potential to improve policymakers' understandings of trends in skills needs and supply. The strength of big data includes timeliness and granularity compared to conventional approaches to skills analysis such as surveys and administrative data. We recently published a flagship report, the Skills Outlook 2021, on learning for life, which uses big data to learn how the COVID crisis has impacted the labor market, and this report is available online. Let me provide some examples on how big data was used and what could be learned. This figure shows how big data, specifically the information on online vacancies from burning glass technologies, can be used to provide information on labor market fluctuations. Job postings published online between January 2020 and March 21 were used to present evidence on the widespread impact of COVID-19 pandemic on labor market demands. The figure presents the observed changes in the number of job postings published online between January 20 and March 21. It compares the volume of jobs advertised online during the pandemic to the period spanning January, February 20, immediately before its first effects came to light. And the figure shows that, on average, across the OECD countries, the number of new jobs posted online dropped by approximately 60% by April 2020. Croatia, Denmark, and the Slovak Republic are examples of countries which experienced among the sharpest declines in job postings in the initial period of the pandemic, basically March to May 2020. While in France, the Netherlands, and the US, the contraction in job offers posted online was milder, although still substantial. However, total jobs published online at the end of March 21 were still considerably lower than during the pre-crisis period in a variety of countries. The data also provides information on the educational requirements for vacancies, allowing us to draw additional conclusions on the effectiveness of individuals by their educational level. For example, among jobs which require lower than secondary education are shipping, receiving, and traffic clerks, and retail salespersons. And among jobs which require tertiary or higher are jobs like software engineer, developer, or financial analyst. And while the COVID-19 pandemic hit virtually all sectors of the economy simultaneously, the analysis of online vacancies suggests that many low-paid and often low-educated workers were particularly affected during the initial phases of the COVID-19 crisis. The results show that, on average, new online job postings requiring a secondary education or lower decreased to a higher degree than those requiring tertiary education at the start of the pandemic. But as the pandemic progressed, the reverse occurred. In other words, in March and April 2020, the drop in new jobs was sharper for low-skilled jobs, while in later periods, it was sharper among higher-skilled jobs. In addition, the data can be further used to learn about a variety of skills, such as transversal skills. And transversal skills are skills that are not specifically related to a particular job, task, academic discipline, or area of knowledge, and that can be used in a wide variety of situations and work settings. And this particular figure shows transversal skills identified based on, again, online vacancies collected in the UK between 2017 and 2019. As I mentioned earlier, digitalization influences skills and the labor market. And this is also reflected when we look at the top 30 transversal skills on this slide. Among this list are competences such as Microsoft Office skills, computer literacy, showing that digital skills or the ability to operate in a digital technology are transversal competencies needed across a wide variety of jobs. These three examples, which are from the Skills Outlook 21 on lifelong learning, are based on data that comes from Burning Glass Technology. It's a software company that collects job postings from over 40,000 online sources. And Burning Glass Technology uses text mining to extract information from each job description, such as the experience, qualifications, skills, wages, etc. Overall, Burning Glass Technologies includes data on more than 100 million online vacancies, more than 14,000 different skills, and over 700 occupations, and covers the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the European countries. These enormous figures already suggest that big data provides much greater potential than traditional labor market data. In fact, big data is characterized by the 3 V's, which stand for high volume, the high volume meaning that it's a large amount of data that is available, high velocity, which is the speed of generation and collection, which makes it almost real time, and high variety, which is the range of data types and sources. And while the data provided by Burning Glass Technologies come from sources which are not primarily designed for labor market and skills analysis, it is based on job advertisements of individual firms which can still provide accurate and real-time information on labor market fluctuations. This next figure illustrates the emergence of big data. The first row provides the source that is also used by Burning Glass Technologies I was just speaking about, online job advertisements. And while the primary role of vacancies is to recruit employees, there is also a secondary role that can be associated with vacancies from a big data perspective, which is to uncover trends in sectoral, occupational, or skills formation information after all of this information is collected. And to show the even larger potential of big data analysis, let's look at the second row when online job advertisements are complemented with online CVs. Employees use online CVs to promote themselves to prospective employees. However, an alternative role of online CVs is that they provide insights into skills of job seekers. And so if we combine both sources, it provides the potential to mark gaps in skills supply and demand, concretely between education and training provision and skills needs required by firms. So clearly, using web-based information to understand skill demand and supply better has several advantages compared to skills information collected via conventional methods, such as surveys and administrative data. But there are also, and that should really be very clear, there are also clear limits to using an employer survey to understand skill needs and trends in occupations, because only a limited number of skills can be considered. Simplification is needed to keep the questionnaire manageable for respondents, and it is difficult to systematically capture emerging skills needs. Unless the sample of the survey is representative, which means large, but that's also costly, analysis typically remains at the aggregate level to derive reliable findings. And working with big data requires developing a system to produce and process data. But once set up, big data allows for greater precision in estimates thanks to the large number of observations available and information clarity. There are many types of information that can be extracted from online job advertisement and CVs for labor market and skills analysis. For instance, skills demand and supply patterns can provide detailed insights into skill needs in occupations and sectors. New and emerging skills can help identify emerging skill needs linked to new tasks and technologies. Skills can also be analyzed at the regional or local level if we have sufficient number of observations, because there is detailed information on location and place of work which is provided. Diffusion of skills requirements can be used to map the proliferation of skills beyond the occupations that they are traditionally or typically associated with. Online job advertisements can give insight into synonyms or new key terms used by employers to define the same or similar sets of skills that are in demand. And job transitions as well, because they can be used to map which skills and employment conditions are similar between different occupations. As we have seen, big data can provide valuable information, and there are a variety of examples how big data has been used for skills policy. The first example is on how big data can be used to detect occupation shortages. In the UK, for instance, big data is used for skills assessment and anticipation exercises that measure shortages in occupations or skills. This information from online job advertisement in the UK is combined with other traditional data sources to assess which skilled occupations are in shortages. In New Zealand, big data is used for education and career purposes. The Ministry of Business and Innovation and Employment provides information based on the trends in the number of online job advertisements per occupation in its Occupation Outlook, its online education and career exploitation tool. And finally, big data can also be used to shape technical and vocational education and training policies, and that's what UNESCO has done in Malawi by mining data from the local online job portals and job titles and used the frequency of mapped job titles as an indicator of employer demand in the labor market. So we have seen that online job advertisements provide a rich source of granular information about skills and job requirements and can be used very useful complement to traditional labor market data to help enrich and support policies on labor market and skills. But as users, we should all be aware of its challenges and limitations. Firstly, the vacancies covered by online job advertising may not represent the true nature of vacancies in all sectors in a given country. The potential bias is likely more pronounced for low-skilled jobs because less or lower-skilled jobs are posted online compared to high-skilled occupations. A study, for example, estimates that around 80 to 90% of postings that require at least a bachelor's degree are found online, compared to 40 to 60% of job postings requiring a high school degree only. Secondly, the skills listed in a vacancy notice probably provide a more comprehensive picture compared to traditional sources. We should not expect this to reflect the full job profile of individuals 100% accurately. There are no consistent standards stipulating what skills should be included in an advertisement. Many skills may be omitted because they have been taken for granted by the recruiter, while those included may have been identified by the employer as salient because they differentiate the job from other similar jobs. Thirdly, the patterns of use of online job portals differ both across and within countries, reflecting the state of the digital divide, skills shortages, and particular employment structures. That's why it's important to also use traditional sources to complement big data analysis. Fourthly, collecting and using big data requires respecting ethical standards and privacy regulations, requiring the development of ownership rights frameworks. And finally, private companies which assemble information from different underlying sources may not disclose all information detailing how the data was put together, such as through the use of algorithms. And while the use of big data has made a lot of progress in the past several years, we're still at the beginning of using and understanding the scope of big data for labor market analysis and how this information can be used to shape policies. On the one hand, significant progress has been made on the skills demand side, where information from online job advertisements are extracted. But to learn about skills gaps between skills demand and skills supply would require systematically analyzing the skills individuals possess, which are available through information provided by online CVs. So combining traditional sources of labor market data with information from big data analysis has a huge potential to shape future education and training policies, provided that users understand the challenges of big data and the importance of adhering to ethical consideration. So in conclusion, we have seen in the last few minutes that the variety of information that big data provides is significantly expanding traditional sources of information and has truly become a game changer regarding the granularity with which we are now able to understand the labor market and skills demand. We've also seen that big data has obtained influence in skills policies, and hopefully its scope will extend even more so as big data can be a valuable source for employers, firms, employees themselves, governance for the challenge of today and the future. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to this enriching discussion, and you can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to see what the OECD Center for Skills is doing. Thank you very much.
큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yes, a warm applause for the speaker. Thank you.
다음은
Let's go on to our next presentation, which will be given by Mr. Hiromichi Katayama from UNESCO.
So you're there? Yes. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Now I hear some echo, but okay, yes, I will continue. Yeah, so I'm Hiromichi Katayama. I'm based in UNESCO headquarters in Paris. So thank you very much for your invitations. So I'm going to talk about how we have been using the big data for the policies of skills development, and also especially on the technical vocational education and training. I think most of my presentation will be overlapped in a sense by the contents presented by the OECD, but I'm trying to elaborate our perspective to support especially the developing countries. And thank you OECD for referring to our work on the Malawi. So UNESCO, we have been implementing a strategy for Tibet 2016 to 2021, and we are covering 3 areas: the youth employment, promoting equity, and supporting transition to green economies. And one of our findings is especially in developing countries, the digitization has been promoting, and also there are increasing use of the micro-credentialing in addition to the traditional vocational training systems. I think this is very important change, especially under this COVID pandemic. Many people lost their jobs. They need to receive training quickly, and they have to find new jobs. So they may not be able to spend long time for receiving a vocational training. So the short-term training will become more and more in demand. And we are talking about how those training can be integrated into the training systems. And this is something which cannot be covered by the traditional statistics. So this is one of the reasons why we are interested in non-traditional information like big data. We have conducted evaluation of the UNESCO Tibet strategy, and the evaluator identified some 2 long-term trends, which is, again, the digitization and also the transition towards sustainable development, responding to the climate change and etc. I skip here. And I just get this slide from the World Economic Forum, and we have observed that some of the occupation has been increasing, like a data analytics and AI machine learning specialist, while some traditional occupations has been decreasing, like a data entry clerks and administrative and executive secretariat. So again, the question is how we can capture the latest status of these kind of issues. And our traditional labor market information, including the administrative and the survey data, may not be able to capture the latest changes. And again, that's one of the reasons why we are interested in using the potential of the big data. So this is a kind of the status that we are facing. And the skills for employment and the Tibet, I think it is very fragmented in most of the countries. The training is provided by multiple ministries, by the Education Ministry, as well as Labor Ministry, and also some other ministries. And as I mentioned, the private sectors, they are providing a lot of short-term trainings and also long-term trainings. And it's sometimes very difficult to compile all the data into one place to inform the Tibet policies. But we have been doing our best to identify and use as much administrative data, survey data, and also any other qualitative and quantitative data as much as possible to support our government for their policy development and implementation. And we are thinking about using a big data in this context as an additional and complementary data to the traditional labor market information. We have been working closely with other partners, including CEDEFOP, European Commission, OECD, etc. And this is one of the policy brief, a kind of guidelines for our stakeholders regarding the use of the big data. And as OECD colleague mentions, in many countries, the more and more enterprises and also job seekers tend to use the online job search platforms. So we have produced this short policy leaflet to explain what the status are and what kind of steps will be needed for them to use big data for their skills development policies. But as you may see, it's a setup of European Commission, OECD. Their main partner is the wealthy OECD member countries and also European countries, while UNESCO's main target is the low-income countries and middle-income countries, which has weaker capacity. So this is something I'm going to highlight at the rest of my presentation. So this is one of the examples that we conducted in Myanmar, which is a low-income country. And we did this analysis before the COVID and also before the governmental changes, and in 2017 and 2018. And this is one of the basic statistics we can obtain from the existing available data. And not surprisingly, the majority of the people in Myanmar, they are working in the traditional agricultural sectors. And there are very limited number of people are working in the modern private sectors, white-collar sectors in the urban areas. I'm saying that it's a very small portion, but still it has a 1.7 million jobs, so the number is very large. So this is something we can get from the traditional labor market information. So as you may see, most of the people are working in the agriculture, forestry, and fishing sectors. And the wholesale and retail trade, they are emerging, but the rest of the sectors are not very big as an agricultural sector. We visited the investment authorities, and we heard the plan of the future skills needs in line with the investment project in the coming years. And they have shared with us these infrastructure projects. And then they imply that the new skills and the new labor force will be needed in the coming years. Then we have identified the online job search platform in Myanmar, which is called jobsnet.com, which was operated by the Australian private company. And we asked them to share their data with us. Many enterprises in the urban areas, they posted their job vacancies on this job search platforms. So we managed to obtain their data, we clean it, and we analyze it and for the use of the Tibet policies in Myanmar. So we get the approximately 20,000 data points, which is the job vacancies posted by the employers from this jobnet.com. And then we have brought our technical partners, JobCred, based in Singapore. They have produced the taxonomies based on the ONET created by the United States, but they are using the artificial intelligence and they modify their taxonomy to the context of Myanmar in line with the job descriptions posted by the Myanmar private companies. And then we cleaned the data and we conducted the analysis and we tried to identify what kind of jobs are demanded in the labor market in the previous 1 year, in the past 12 months. And this is one of the results that we have obtained. These are the demand for the top 20 job titles in Myanmar. So you see that the sales executives, accountants, senior accountant, marketing executives, those are in high demand in the Myanmar labor market. And in addition to the job titles, we would like to identify what kind of skills are demanded. So as I said, our partner JobCred, they have developed the customized taxonomy for Myanmar and using the artificial intelligence. And based on that, we have identified what kind of skills are demanded in the context of Myanmar. So for example, for the sales executives, these are the top 10 skills that were demanded in the Myanmar, which is sales, identifying new business opportunities, customer services, manage client relationships. And you see the rest of the points. And we think that this can provide information for the training providers regarding what kind of training they have to provide. It could be a long-term training, or it could be a short-term, a few months training. But in a sense, this is a real demand by the enterprises, private sectors, and this is something training systems will need to provide to Myanmar at the moment. So this is a kind of lessons learned, and we think that the labor force surveys, especially in low-income countries, they are too slow, and sometimes it is too expensive for them to conduct labor force surveys frequently. So it tells us some background information, and we have to continue to use the labor force survey analysis. But if we want to see the latest demand of skills in the labor market, relying on the labor force surveys may not be enough. And big data can give us more recent and also more granular information for the consideration of the training providers. But as OECD colleague mentions, we faced a lot of challenges. The reliability of data sources. We managed to identify the company, but many people say that many people are using this platform, but there's no proof. So there are some other competitors as well. And also the coverage of data is an issue. We know that it covers the white-collar jobs in the urban area, like Yangon or Mandalay, but the majority of the people are living in the rural areas. They are not covered. And also data cleaning, we need some new technologies. I mean, we have a lot of statisticians and economists, but the big data analysis is something different, and we need some new technologies. And also the taxonomy. We successfully managed to have a partnership with this Singaporean-based company, and they have developed a customized taxonomy using the artificial intelligence. But this is something we may need to explore more. And of course, the complementarity with the other labor market informations. This big data cannot be replaced by the labor force survey. So we have to do both. And yeah, there are, as I said, administrative data, survey data. In addition to that, I think we also have to use the more qualitative based approach, like a skills foresight and focus group interviews, and also the opinion studies and any other types of data collections. That's something we have to do, especially in the context of low-income country, which has a weak capacity of statistics. So allow me to briefly advertise what we are doing in the coming years. So we are now preparing a new strategy for Tibet in 2022 to 2029, and we are trying to respond to these trends, like a recovery from the COVID, and also the technological changes like digitization, and also the informality is a critical element, we think. Especially in low-income countries, more than half of the employers are working in the informal economy. How we can capture that information and how we can support their training is a big issue. And we are targeting the individuals, and also the how skills development will be in line with the skills needs in the economies. And also the last point is the inclusion and equity is our top priorities. We should not exclude the vulnerable groups like migrants and also the people with disabilities and also any other minority groups. So we are trying to do our best to include those people as well, so that everybody can have an access to Tibet and employment opportunities. And in the coming years, we will continue to pay attention to the data and the monitoring elements. And as I said, in addition to using the traditional labor market informations, we will try to use the big data from online job search platform as much as possible, even in the context of the low-income countries. We have been working with the development partners, and also we have a network of UNIVO, or the network of Tibet institutions. And also we have established the Global Education Coalition, and we have mobilized the private sector, which are providing a pro bono training program, distance learning programs for our member countries, like Microsoft, Huawei, IBM. So we would like to strengthen our partnership with these private sector partners as well under the new strategy. We are having an international conference to discuss this further in the 7th and 8th of December, and we have invited everybody. So we hope that you will be able to join our conference in December to discuss this issue further. I will stop here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Hiromichi, thank you for your kind presentations. Yes, 마지막 이제 우리
So let's go on to the last presentation.
주시겠습니다.
So the CEO of Tapacross, Kim Yong-hak, will give the last presentation. So I am the last speaker in this important HR forum, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'd like to go on with my presentation in line with the two earlier presentations that you have just heard. So I've been operating this company called Tapacross for the past 13 years, and we are a social listening company. And during this time, the world has been experiencing accelerated pace of change. So the terminology big data used to exist only in concept, but then the time it took to actually produce a lot of big data, that speed, that process has accelerated. And since then, the drivers of society has been ICT technologies. As you know, ICT technologies provide us with more convenience. However, on the other hand, the lifestyles of the past and the principles of past life was all disappearing. They were very different. The current situation was very different from the past. I'm sure you've heard about the term VUCA. So the characteristics of the world that we are living in today can be defined as volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And this is what VUCA stands for. So there's been major changes happening at accelerated pace in the modern society, and this is unprecedented event happening, and the conceptual formulation and descriptions also are very vague. And so at every moment, whether it's at home or for work or for our country, we have to continue to make decisions. But we are seeing a spike in the level of uncertainty at every moment that requires decision making. So we need to have a basis, a foundation upon which we will make those decisions to minimize risks. So those are the kinds of efforts that we are engaging in right now. So we are in a totally new world. In this new normal way, we had another major change happen during the past 2 years, which is the onset of the pandemic. So there are a lot of reasons why we have been predicting that we will have to go on to post-COVID era. And of course, we don't know what the future will bring us. And of course, we have to live our daily lives. Businesses must continue. But again, we want to find a path forward which can minimize risks. And one way to do that is to use big data. As our two earlier speakers have mentioned, there are various data sources that we can utilize for companies, for countries, for different organizations. They do have demographic information that they can utilize, and also using digital device or Internet of Things. A lot of other quantitative information can be accessed as well. Using online or using our phones, we can access them and use the services, and we leave our traces. So when we access certain site, or in terms of the time we spent online, or our purchasing patterns, our pattern of consuming contents, for example, we all leave traces. And also another important aspect is the non-stereotype text. We are producing those by using social network services. So the images, pictures, and text, so they take up about 97% of the different data sources, and the proportion and the size is going to grow further in the future. So this non-traditional information has to do with all of the experiences, the emotions of the consumers. And of course, there's a lot of qualitative information that is included here. And if you look at this more closely, as we try to formulate policies, as we try to develop business services and products, will have great implications. With regards to big data, I'd like to connect that to the educational governance in Korea right now. But before that, the social data and the analysis and the examples is what I want to go into briefly. For the central government agencies, ministries, or other institutions that are in charge of carrying out implementing the policies, they are already using social data a lot. So consumers' perception of these organizations, these ministries, and also on the upcoming elections in Korea, or the consumer or customer perception of the existing policies. We do an analysis of these continually. In Seoul City, for example, there is the bicycle service called Tarengi that has been in operation, and also policy on establishing new satellite cities around Seoul. And the place, the characteristics of the infrastructures in these new new cities, and reflecting the opinions and the perceptions of the consumers in the new policies. That is already being done. And also in the age of aging. So what are the needs with regards to the care service for the seniors? So we are doing that analysis already, particularly for the field of education, for childcare or daycare service, for example. And there's a lot of gender issues involved here as well. So we do a lot of policy analysis. In society issues, it's the same as well. For social enterprises, ESG, and other social conflict elements, we do the analysis, we do tracking to find effective corresponding measures down the road. And of course, in the private business sector, we do a lot of these activities, even more than the public sector. Already, many companies have a lot of technological advancements. So with technological differentiation alone, it's difficult for you to go ahead and be a leader in companies. So previously, what we are seeing that there's a speeding up of the new product release cycle. And also, we have realized that there's been more efficient ways of classifying the consumers into more granular groups. So for example, in product development, service development, now the approach is what kinds of channels do we need to use? What kinds of messaging do we need to use in order to reach out to our target customer? And these products or services that are developed through this process within our category, compared to our competitors, what is our differentiating point? So that is the way we look at the brand recognition of the consumers, and we do indexation of that awareness and develop the services accordingly. Or to the other consumers, there are other social network real-time feedback which we are monitoring, and if there are negative opinions uploaded, then we can come up with or formulate strategies and policies that can respond to those feedback. And for there's been a lot of campaigns and promotions with regards to product community. So not just our campaigns, but other companies' campaigns for other categories. We can refer to those and use them as reference so that we can develop more efficient strategies of our own. So I'm showing you some of those examples here. As you can see, the existing demographic information. Aside from that, we look at further, more granular details. What's the reason for the purchase? What was bought? So we can segment the customers further using new criteria. And the feedstock for a new product, what kinds of feedstock would be optimal? So we have more micro-targeting techniques that are available, and until the end process of actual sales, what kinds of channels, what kind of messaging should we be mindful of? So we are looking into all of those things. And also when it comes to marketing, there are always seasonal issues that you need to consider. So for example, in early November, most marketers already look into the next year's Lunar New Year gift packages. And also for textbooks, what kinds of textbooks should we specialize in? So the seasonal marketing issues also are very important. We can look at the past 2-3 years trends to determine the pricing, the characteristics of the products that will be released next year. And on the right side of this slide, you will see the popular styles. For example, in the living category, if you're a company working in this field, the parents who are now going to buy new furniture for their student children, or during COVID, there's been more time spent in homes, and so what kinds of leisure activities can the family enjoy within their homes? What kinds of decorations will be more popular? So what coloring, what materials, what knickknacks would be most popular? So we can look at all of this information to determine what kinds of future needs there will be. For telecom companies, we have a lot of customers that use the 5G services, and so there can be real-time feedback from the customers. 5G quality is not as good as expected, or is better than expected, or the devices, what the customers think about the devices that are being sold. There can be feedback on that. And also, on average, we drink 3.5 cups of coffee a day. So the brand identities of the franchise coffee shops are very different. So some cafes provide customized coffees, or you can use web or mobile service for pre-ordering, which is an added convenience feature. For some other brands, the MZ generation is their main target, which led to the increase in their profits. So these aspects also can be good examples of the use of big data in industry. So using these techniques, we can try to apply those in education governance. Of course, I can't explain everything, but I'd like to briefly talk about the educational governance related social data example. So we are looking at 2019, 2020, and 2021. So we looked at the gradually increasing interest and the use of big data in the educational governance. Broadly, we can divide it into mass media and social media. And so online media takes up 67%. Of course, the educational governance was the keyword that was used here. And of course, on the diverse discussions on educational governance, there's been a lot of discussion in social media as well. And looking at it more closely, so educational governance, so what kinds of key terminologies are being connected to this issue? So this is the word crowding, a result that we can show you. So within the boxes, we have some terminology such as the Office of Education, education policies, the youths who are the targets of these policies, and then budget and the education committee, vocational training, care, community. These kinds of keywords came to the fore. And if you look at the next page, it shows you a clearer picture. In the news, the local community, towns, were counted as the most popular terms. In the social media, students and parents were very popular terms. In both channels, you will see that the topmost ranking went to the community or the towns. The concept of governance means that there is participation from the various stakeholders and participants. And so the people, the public who are the target or the subject of such educational services are deemed to be very important. And next, we looked at the keywords related to policy. Again, we looked at the online news or mass media, cooperation, welfare, infrastructure, ecosystem, and other policy-based keywords were popular. In social media, the popular keywords were mostly things that people feel on a daily basis. So learning, textbooks, or after-school activities. And so let's deep dive into this area. And if we take a look more closely, the educational governance and how it is being received by the public, what are the demands of the public, we can have a more clearer understanding on this topic. Again, looking at the results by word crowding result, we see creativity and convergence as the most important keywords. Information society, platform, eco-friendly, talents, global were some of the other key words which showed a high level of connection. So let's look at another different aspect, which is on educational service. In the mass media, the lifelong learning, care, and other learning related terminologies came to the fore. However, in social media, college entrance exam, vocational training, higher education were the more popular key words. And I think this difference stems from the fact that for parents, for local communities, they want the children, the students to go on to higher level education institutions or graduate from prestigious schools to find good jobs in society. And so that desire was reflected in the keyword search. And there are 4 different regions that we looked at more closely. In the case of Gyeonggi province, the elementary, middle, high school, education were all important terms that came to the fore. And for a college entrance exam and alternative schools also, we found that. In the case of Seoul city, there were more keywords related to higher education. Universities, graduate school were some of the more popular keywords here. And looking at the results of this analysis, a lot of thoughts came to my mind. In the case of Sejong City, schools for the gifted and art school or other keywords which we could not find in other regions came up. And so in the Sejong City, in their curriculum, there are special characteristics in their education field which was represented through the keyword search. In the case of Jeju province, in Korea, it has the most number of international schools. And so the keyword search results reflected that fact because most of the important keywords had to do with international schools and other global education systems. So if you look at these social media more closely, you will find clues on how to design better policies for education, for vocational training, or for lifelong learning after graduation. So these consumer needs can be understood, well analyzed, and if we come up with the policies based on such analysis, we will be able to realize the goals of educational governance, which is to provide opportunities for all stakeholders to cooperate more harmoniously. So this is the end of my presentation, and I look forward to the discussion later on. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kim Yong-hak, for your presentation. So we have listened to the 3 presentations. We have about 34 minutes remaining, and we will be opening up the floor to accept questions later on. But everyone talked about big data and the use of big data for social analysis for use in education. And this big data itself is a keyword in different sectors, it seems. By utilizing this data, of course, you will need to have algorithms, and through the algorithm generation, you put that data in and machine learning happens. And what accelerates machine learning is deep learning. And so all of these methodologies seem to be very important concepts. In the case of Dr. Mohamedou, she talked about the benefits of using big data in the labor market. And Mr. Hiromichi,
정책 Tibet
He talked about Tibet, the technical vocational education and training. And he talked about how big data can be utilized along with the traditional labor market data. And he gave a case example of Myanmar.
에서의
and Mr. Kim Yong-hak talked about the use of social data in various areas, consumer trend analysis and marketing also. And lastly, he also talked about use of this data and keyword analysis in education. So cooperation, convergence, creativity were some of the most important keywords from education. We have received a lot of questions from the floor. So let me share that with you.
네.
Here's the first question. This is a question to all of the speakers. I want to learn a little bit more in detail about the definition of skills defined by OECD and UNESCO. Is there a difference in terms of the definition or the concept of capacity between the 2 organizations, OECD and UNESCO? Also, is there a difference in the definition of skills? If so, then do you communicate with one another to bridge the gap, the difference? First, Dr. Mohamedou.
answer.
Yes, thank you very much. No, there is no disparity. So we work very closely with UNESCO, and we are, as the UNESCO speaker mentioned, we are in various working groups together, and that's very important, not just for the definition of skills, which is already used, but also for the taxonomy that he was mentioning, also in the future analysis. So not only with the UNESCO, but with other institutions, there is we're committing to working together, and we're working in various working groups. Yes.
Thank you. 네, 미스터 히로미치 답변해 주실까요?
Mr. Hiromichi? Mr. Hiromichi Katayama, please go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, definitely we have been working very closely with the OECD, and yes, I think we share the common definition and the common scope of our work. But as I said, the OECD is targeting the OECD member countries, but the UNESCO's our priority is Africa. It's a low-income country, so the context is a little bit different. And at the moment, we have been working with the ILO and the World Bank to produce a new analytical work on Tibet by focusing on low-income and middle-income countries. So we can clarify the issue further. But yes, I think there will be no difference between the OECD. Yeah, we are working together. Thank you.
네, 답변 감사드립니다.
Thank you for that answer. Let's go on to the second question.
4 years ago, Korea became an aging society, and 4 years later, we will be an aged society. from the perspective of big data, aside from demographic information, what kinds of data should we accumulate and manage to help future growth or to use as future growth engine? Again, Dr. Mohamedou, do you want to answer this first?
Thank you very much. A very interesting question. One of the points we have been working on in the skills outlook I was mentioning is lifelong learning. And so because of the longer span of work of people, because of the aging population, it's very important to continue to upskill and reskill. And that's really these skills around adaptability, around resilience, are very important and are coming up more and more. Of course, it's difficult to assess, but that's really something that we see as the very important skills that are coming throughout a very long career that will be needed in not only Korea, but quite a few other countries that have an aging population.
Okay. 예, 미스터 히로미치도 답변해 주시겠습니까?
Yes, Mr. Hiromichi Katayama, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I think the aging society will be discussed under our new strategy, and so far we have not yet been working on this issue, but we think that this is very critical. And yeah, especially on the digitization is very critical for the old people, especially for the old people, because it's a part of their life skills. If they, in order for them to survive in the current society, they have to develop some digital skills, and we should think about what kind of training will be needed for them. And also, I think we can discuss the skills which is needed for the old people in the context of the social protection and also the pension systems. I think it's in many countries the pension system is not functioning well because of the decrease of the number of the workers and also increase of the number of the old people. So that means that the old people will need to continue to work as long as possible. So we may need to think about what kind of support, what kind of training, capacity development will be needed for these people. This is something we will discuss under the new strategy. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 남은 김용학 대표.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kim Yong-hak, do you want to go next? On the problem of aging, I think it is the most important challenge that we face at the moment. We can divide it into two aspects. If you look at Korean situation, we have a very fast pace of aging or becoming a super age society. So the super age people, they will be those 75 years old or older. So we don't have enough infrastructure to support them in the first place. And another problem is that recently, because of the aging of the baby boomers, we see that the first generation baby boomers who have now become part of the aged population, they have a high level of economic purchasing power. They are very culturally sophisticated. And so, however, we don't have the environment for them to continue to work in society. We did a big data analysis recently of these group of people. So we looked at the seniors, the silvers, and the first keyword for them was health previously, but now health is less important than looks. So the number one keyword for this group of people is outer looks. So based on just demographic information, we won't be able to understand these aged group. So we have to understand the changes in their lifestyle and their characteristics and background. So all of that information is being reflected in big data. And so many of these people, for them to travel to Italy, for example, some of the baby boomers, they go to learn Italian for months to visit Italy, or they would rent offices to give lectures to their peers, for example. So we really need to understand the needs of these specific groups, and that has a lot of industrial implications as well.
Thank you. Let's go on to the next question. Now, for jobs, there are skills, capacities, qualifications that are required. There are hard skills and the soft skills. So I think that it would be difficult to identify the soft skills utilizing big data. You talked about the limitations that still exist, but do you think that soft skills can be identified through big data? Dr. Mohamedou?
Again, a very interesting question. It's really a challenge, and you are pinpointing that as well, because one of the issues is that, particularly, for instance, if we look at online vacancies, is that people define their skills through tasks and activities they have done. So one thing is really to try to at least try to see the skills coming out in, for instance, let's look at communication that have come out in some of the activities that people and tasks have been leading on. So it's very difficult because, for instance, if the adaptability or creativity is something that we also need to then define a little bit better the synonyms and the words that we would be looking for to identify those skills. How do we then search for the ability of person to adapt? How do we find also the possibility of the person to develop the teamwork? Or so these are very difficult. I do think that with time we will be able to. We're already working a lot more on the taxonomy, on synonyms, on putting together nomenclatures and so on. So I do think we will advance on that. But the question raised is actually one of the difficult ones. And that's why we're also always saying that with big data alone should not be the driver for sort of analysis only, and that we still need to have traditional sources. We still need to go through other types of surveys, because otherwise we won't be able to capture, and policy shouldn't be driven only by sort of algorithm-driven analysis or big data analysis. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's go on to give a question to Mr. Hiromichi Katayama.
If you look at the job vacancy information, the job description needed by the enterprises, you can see what kind of hard skills and soft skills are needed. So yes, I think there is a potential of using big data to for us to get a better information, more granular information about the needs for the hard skills and soft skills. And as I said, the Unesco has been working with the private company like Microsoft, Huawei, IBM, and many other private companies providing pro bono trainings for our member countries. And most of them are providing the soft skills to support the soft skills, like innovation skills to improve the communication skills, teamwork, etc., etc. And we relatively have a better understanding regarding what kind of training we can provide in partnership with the private company, and we will continue to do this effort. Thank you.
네, 다음.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have another question for Mr. Hiromichi Katayama. Let's take a look. The UNESCO member states, I understand, have gaps when it comes to the data that they have, statistical data. So having said that, when you do country comparisons, there may be countries that lack sufficient data. How do you manage this? Can you answer this?
Yes, thank you. So we have a statistics institute based in Montreal, Canada, and they have collected the cross-country comparable education statistics. But unfortunately, the skills for employment is not fully captured. So in terms of the education statistics, I think we have a pretty much good coverage thanks to the cooperation with the statistics agency of our member countries. But whenever we conduct the situational analysis, and also when we provide a policy advice to our member countries, we go to the statistics office and we go to the other relevant ministries. And as I mentioned, try to identify the existing available data and statistics. Not everything is cross-country comparable, but like I presented in the case of Myanmar, there are many informations which exist and available, both quantitative and also qualitative. And if the existing available data is not enough, we can always think about the alternatives, like organizing a focus group and get the more qualitative or even the anecdotal information. So yeah, in this way, we are doing our best to collect as much data as possible. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
세 분.
Next question is for all three speakers. Big data analysis, is that done by people, or do you use AI technology for big data analysis? So the analysis, if it's done by machines, what happens to the social and ethical values? I mean, how are these values reflected in the analysis? Dr. Mohamedou?
So the big data that we use is just the source, and then we have policy analysts who work on the analysis itself, and that's where there are standards to be using big data. It's anonymized, and there are different standards that are used in this way. So we have that, and anything that we present is aggregate, and so we do not mention sort of companies or persons and so on. We don't. So that's the type of ethical standards that we have to. Also, most of the large international institutions have also standards look with regard to access of data, but also dissemination of data. And so we are bound by following those policies. And it's very important because we need a continued source of data. And so we need to use that data in a very careful way in all respect of the source it's coming from. So that's something that all of the institutions are also using. And it's very important for us as well that the providers we work with also implement those standards. And so we expect the same from them as well, because we do work with private sector providers, as in the example I mentioned. Thank you.
네, 다음은 Mr. Hiromichi.
Thank you. Yeah, about the ethical values, I think our partners, the online job board, they are very sensitive about this issue. So usually we have an agreement before we get the data from them to confirm that we follow their standards of the ethical values. The company we have been working with in Malawi was the company managed by the UK company, and in Myanmar it was an Australian company. So they are managing the ethical issues in line with the Western country standards. So yeah, to answer your questions, yes, we know that this is a very important issue, and we have a memorandum of understanding, and yes, we agree on this issue before we conduct the analysis. Thank you.
네, 예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for the answer. What about Mr. Kim Young-hak? Do you want to add? Yes, people do the interpretation. Intervention by people is necessary, because if you look at the characteristics of text, they reflect the context of the times, context of society. Particularly for social media information, you will see new terminologies that is unique to that period. There's are nuanced differences in the text, and this may lead to some biases. And one of the questions for Dr. Mohamedou earlier was on soft skills. And in tackling or dealing with the big data, one of the most important skills necessary is designing the methodology for interpreting the big data. And of course, there could be different types of skills that is necessary. It can be an issue of developing good philosophies and value systems for the evaluators. So you need to develop hypotheses, and in the process of proving these big data using the hypothesis, you have to have the skills to be able to understand the cause and effect, the relationships, and also tie that to the social values that exist in society. In the level of interpretation, you can give your own personal opinion and connect that to the value system of the society that you are in. So the next question goes again to Mr. Kim Yong-hak. The analysis that you mentioned, in terms of communication between the government and people seems to be effective. And for establishing policies for educational governance, for making future directions, it seems that big data can be quite useful. So up to what year or how far into the future can we predict the future using big data, particularly in the field of education, which requires long-term planning? Yes, in fact, that's a question that I'm grappling with right now. So I've heard about holistic education a lot when I was growing up, but do you think holistic education is a terminology or a keyword that is included in the educational governance system these days? Not necessarily, because societal change is happening much faster than before. So the visual aspects of what we need at the moment is very important, and that is reflected in the key word analysis. However, I do believe that there are certain values, such as holistic education, that still has to be included in educational governance. But then, honestly, as for very long-term planning, it could be difficult to use big data at the moment to have very effective long-term planning. But then initially when I was working in the field of big data, I would connect that to forecasting. But then 10 years ago, forecasting was possible into 10, 20 years into the future. But then recently, even mid-term forecasting has become more difficult, because big data has the efficacy of tracking. So 5 years later, rather than 5 years later, right now, these micro changes, what are these micro changes happening? And my response, what should be my response to these micro changes that are already happening right now? Big data would be most effective when used in this area, particularly for product and service development, for the businesses, for the companies. It's difficult for them to understand the customer change in the customer desires or mindset. And so that's why they're using big data for this very short-term planning.
Thank you very much. This is a question to all three. The digital giants such as Google, now they utilize big data and they have impact on many different countries, including the low-income and middle-income countries in economy and society. What is your response to such trends?
It's reflective of the availability of data. We have a massive amount of data, and so it's something for us that is quite important, actually, to have access to that much data. What's important, again, is coming back to the previous question, is that is used in an ethical fashion, and that's very important. But for us, the more data is available, the better. That does not necessarily mean that we use the data as such. It has to have a certain quality standards, and our analysts work as well on verifying, on cleaning the data, and so on. And so it's a raw material, and so as with all raw material, it needs to be refined, and that's the importance of continuing of having that interface with the human. So the big data itself is useless without the human side of it that we have to add on to it. So for us, the more data, the better. It doesn't mean that it directly and immediately translates into use, however. Thank you.
Mr. Hiromi.
Yes, I completely agree with the points made by the OECD, and UNESCO has been ensuring the human-centered approach. We organized the conference of the artificial intelligence in Beijing 2019, and we discussed this issue. And we think that we have to always think about the human-centeredness. And about the big company like Google and also Microsoft, we think that it is important to work with them and to engage them into this debate. So that's one of the reasons that we have been working very closely with not yet with Google, but with the Microsoft, Huawei, and those companies. And I think they are sharing the common understanding with us, and we will continue to do that. Thank you.
우리 김 대표님도 답변해 주세요.
Thank you. Mr. Kim Yong-hak, do you also want to answer? So monopolizing the data, I think there's always been that danger. And so, as we have just heard now, there has to be sharing and collaboration in different various aspects. Each country may have some access to some information, but then there are information that must be shared among the different countries. So it's an issue of finding ways to discuss how we can share, how to engage in more discussions and to find solutions going forward. Again, the next question is for all three speakers. In fact, this was a question that I had in mind personally also. So thank you very much for the interesting presentations. But then after making predictions about the future using big data, how do we actually reflect that result in educational governance? So what is that methodology of reflecting the big data results in educational governance? So we've had very meaningful results from the big data analysis from all three presentations. In the case of Tibet, in education, providing education, or we're talking about educational governance here. So for the educators to utilize these good results from big data analysis and transmit that to the students, I mean, do we have actual examples of application in the field? So the teachers, the professors have to change for us to enjoy educational innovation, and the environment has to change also. And with an increase in budget, we can improve the educational environment. But then for the contents and the methodology, whether it's TVET or whatever, you need to have changes in these other aspects also for good transmission of the learnings from big data analysis to the students. But this always has been problematic. We've always been talking about we need communication skills, all these 30 transversal skills are important. We've been talking about that a lot, but then you need to have very good relationship established between the teacher and the students, because if not, we won't have effective transmission of the learnings of the big data analysis to the students. So can you share with us successful cases or actual applications, successful applications? So Dr. Mohamedou, do you want to go ahead first? Don't be too pressured, but just any answer?
I think it's very important at this point that you raise, because one thing that we've seen, particularly I think in the area of education, we haven't tapped yet into the potential. So one thing we've seen, for instance, with the pandemic is that schools transferred the schools to the digital. They haven't really transformed the way we teach, and I think it's very important. And you touch on one thing, which has to do with the training of teachers in the sense of digital skills and knowing to what extent they can use this information to actually transform the way they're teaching. And one of the examples is to make sure that the curriculum is more adapted to each student in the sense of identifying the gaps and making a much more targeted and granular accompanying of students in the classroom based on the data that is collected throughout the digitalization of processes. And that's very important. And we're very far away from that at the moment. We're still, but I think we see that as a potential, and that's really what it is. But what it requires is what you have very rightly pointed, is that the teachers need to be trained into this, and they need to be trained and reskilled and upskilled on a regular basis so that it translates into the accompanying of the students as well in that sense.
네, 감사합니다. Mr. Hiromichi, 답변해 주시겠습니까?
Mr. Hiromichi Katayama, please go ahead.
Yeah, we are still at the experimental stage, and I mean, I don't have any evidence to show as results, but I think our aim is to share the results with the policymakers, with the ministry officials, for their consideration of the reforming of the occupational standards and also curricula, as also mentioned by the OECD, in order to change, in order to adapt the contents of training to the needs of labor market as in a timely manner. And also, we have observed that the many training organizations, training institutions, they provide non-formal short-term programs. And I think the results of big data can give them some information regarding what kind of short-term programs they can provide in order to meet the needs immediately. So that's what we are thinking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. 예, 우리 김영학 대표님도.
So, Mr. Kim Yong-hak, there was a news article I read before coming here, and the HRD people of the 500 major companies in Korea, they have some criteria for hiring, and the highest score goes to work relationship, skill relationship with work requirements. So what you learn in school, is that applicable to work? And also the related experience was another important criteria. So even if you're hiring someone who have other career experiences, I mean, is that experience relatable to the job description of our company? So in fact, consumption trend, that's what I'm teaching in the university right now. But in fact, 80% of my classes is comprised of practicum, because learning the theories alone, I think this market analysis using big data, that has existed for a long time. So you have to be used to actually working with these tools. And if you receive good training at schools with regards to actual use of these tools, those skills are readily applicable in work sites. And so, in fact, many people who are working right now go to HRD centers to receive additional training. So sometimes they receive funding support from the government for these programs, but some some employees, they would pay to receive these kinds of trainings. So we have different institutions that we looked into the different kinds of programs that are being offered. And the most popular ones was being provided by the youngest company. So there were a lot of good feedback. The curriculum content may be the same, but there are characteristics in these newer curriculum that reflect the actual needs of the times, and the lecturers, the instructors are good at communicating with the trainees. And so they have very good brand imaging, a very recent brand imaging. And so this is a differentiation point from a trainee's perspective. You know, this is a major positive aspect for these training programs. So I think if we use big data analysis to really understand these fine characteristics of these needs for skills training in the market, then it will be very helpful. So we do have such success cases so far. So this work capacity improvement is what Kim Yong-hak has just mentioned. The results of big data is actually reflecting the social phenomenon, and how that can be transferred into the classrooms, into sites of learning. I think that's the main issue. Einstein has said learning is experience. So that was mentioned very long time ago. Learning is experience, and everything else is just information. So the remaining things are just mere information. But in today's world, it's just a click away. The information can be accessed by clicks. So what is more important today is to have actual experiences. So we have to understand where we can have such direct experiences. And I believe that is what Einstein was mentioning during his time. And I believe it's still applicable today. So the learning experience, we have to ensure that the teachers, the instructors understand this experience and relay that importance, that information to the trainees and students. And I think that is a very important aspect of educational governance. We don't have much time, but we do have one last question. I feel it's very important. I will share the question with you.
되고 있으면
Now, if you utilize big data analyze big data at the company, some of the leaders who are in charge of decision making ask us, why are you trying to analyze big data and trying to utilize it? So how can we persuade the managers, the leaders, to utilize big data? Dr. Mohamed.
Very, very right. And I think there has been a bit of a paradigm shift on this. So a few years ago, it was indeed very difficult to present big data policy analysis to policymakers. It was really an issue. But I think there has been a paradigm shift where there is this openness now to consider it, again, not as the sole source of policy decision or analysis. We need to make sure that we present it among other information that is presented. But I think there is a lot more of openness because policymakers are actually interested in more immediate information. And that's what big data gives us. It's the quasi-real-time nature of it that is interesting to policymakers and is important, and that's what big data does. They don't have the time to wait for the survey that may come in 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. They need to have more information ready, and that's what actually makes it easier for us to present as one of the other elements that they have to consider as well. Thank you.
네, 시간이 많이 돼서.
Because of the time constraint, I do not think that we can listen to the answers of the two other speakers. So I ask for your understanding. Today, during this session, we talked about big data and the governance in education. I mentioned this in the beginning, but I think that the educators and the trainees and the students need to establish a relationship. We talk a lot about DT, digital transformation. And I think that through digital transformation, we can actually ensure learning transformation, and we can utilize big data in this process. So I think that big data can be a tool for leading the way in learning transformation. Our time is up. We did have one last question, but I would like to ask for your understanding for not being able to accommodate this question. The biggest role of the moderator is keeping the time. We are a little bit behind schedule, but I would like to close the session if you agree, please. A big round of applause. Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, thank you very much. So we were not just provided with simple information, but I think that there was an in-depth analysis of the role of big data and the changes that it can bring about in the education field. It was indeed a beneficial session. Please, a big round of applause for our speakers and moderator. Yes, thank you very much. With this, I would like to conclude the Global HR Forum 2021. For 2 days, more than 100 speakers from home and abroad participated in 28 sessions. We talked about digital transformation, ESG, and a sustainable future. I would like to thank you for your participation. I hope that this event proved to be informative. With this, we would like to conclude the Global HR Forum 2021. After the event is over, we will request for you to participate in a survey. Please participate so that we can reflect your views to prepare a better program next year. Thank you very much for joining us online and offline. My name is Kim Na-yoon. Thank you for joining me.